Housing and Neighbourhoods. Part 1. Bombay was a crowded city. While every Londoner in the 1840s enjoyed an average space of 155 square yards, Bombay had a mere 9.5 square yards. By 1872, when London had an average of 8 persons per house, the density in Bombay was as high as 20. From its earliest days, Bombay did not grow according to any plan, and houses, especially in the fort area, were interspersed with gardens. The Bombay fort area, which formed the heart of the city in the early 1800s, was divided between a native town, where most of the Indians lived, and a European or white section. A European suburb and an industrial zone began to develop to the north of the fort settlement area, with a similar suburb and cantonment in the south. This racial pattern was true for all 3 presidency cities. With the rapid and unplanned expansion of the city, the crisis of housing and water supply became acute by the mid-1850s. The arrival of the textile mills only increased the pressure on Bombay's housing. Like the European elite, the richer Parsi, Muslim, and upper caste traders and industrialists of Bombay lived in sprawling, spacious bungalows. Housing and Neighbourhoods. Part 2. In contrast, more than 70% of the working people lived in the thickly populated Chawls of Bombay. Like the tenements in London, these houses were largely owned by private landlords such as merchants, bankers, and building contractors, looking for quick ways of earning money from anxious migrants. Each chawl was divided into smaller one-room tenements which had no private toilets. Many families could reside at a time in a tenement. People had to keep the windows of their rooms closed, even in humid weather, due to the close proximity of filthy gutters, privies, buffalo stables, etc. Yet though water was scarce, and people often quarreled every morning for a turn at the tap, observers found that houses were kept quite clean. The homes being small, streets and neighborhoods were used for a variety of activities such as cooking, washing, and sleeping. Liquor shops and akhadas came up in any empty spot. Streets were also used for different types of leisure activities. Caste and family groups in the mill neighborhoods were headed by someone who was similar to a village headman. Sometimes, the jobber in the mills could be the local neighborhood leader. He settled disputes, organized food supplies, or arranged informal credit. He also brought important information on political developments. People who belonged to the depressed classes found it even more difficult to find housing. Lower castes were kept out of many chawls and often had to live in shelters made of corrugated sheets, leaves, or bamboo poles. If town planning in London emerged from fears of social revolution, planning in Bombay came about as a result of fears about the plague epidemic. The City of Bombay Improvement Trust was established in 1898. It focused on clearing poorer homes out of the city centre. By 1918, trust schemes had deprived 64,000 people out of their homes, but only 14,000 were rehoused. In 1918, a Rent Act was passed to keep the rents reasonable, but it had the opposite effect of producing a severe housing crisis since landlords withdrew houses from the market. Expansion of the city has always posed problem in Bombay because of the scarcity of land. One of the ways the city of Bombay has developed is through massive reclamation projects. Land reclamation in Bombay. Did you know that the 7 islands of Bombay were joined into one landmass only over a period of time? The earliest project began in 1784. The Bombay governor, Willian Hornby, approved the building of Great Sea Wall, which prevented the flooding of the low-lying areas of Bombay. Since then, there have been several reclamation projects. The need for additional commercial space in the mid-19th century led to the formulation of several plans, both by the government and private companies, for the reclamation of more land from the sea. Private companies became more interested in taking financial risks. In 1864, the Bay Reclamation Company won the right to reclaim the western foreshore from the tip of Malabar Hill to the end of Colaba. Reclamation often meant the levelling of the hills around Bombay. By the 1870s, although most of the private companies closed down due to the mounting cost, the city had expanded to about 22 square miles. As the population continued to increase rapidly in the early 20th century, every bit of the available area was built over and new areas were reclaimed from the sea. A successful reclamation project was undertaken by the Bombay Port Trust, which built a dry dock between 1914 and 1918 and used the excavated earth to create the 22-acre Ballard Estate. Subsequently, the famous Marine Drive of Bombay was developed. Bombay as the city of dreams, the world of cinema and culture. Despite its massive overcrowding and difficult living conditions, Bombay appears to many as a Mayapuri, a city of dreams. Many Bombay films deal with the arrival in the city of new migrants and their encounters with the real pressures of daily life. When did the Bombay film industry make its first appearance? Harish Chandra Sakharam Bhatwadekar shot a scene of a wrestling match in Bombay's Hanging Gardens, and it became India's first movie in 1896. Soon after, Dada Saheb Phalke made Raja Harishchandra in 1913. After that, there was no turning back. By 1925, Bombay had become India's film capital, producing films for a national audience. The amount of money invested in about 50 Indian films in 1947 was rupees 756 million. By 1987, the film industry employed 5,20,000 people. Most of the people in the film industry were themselves migrants who came from cities like Lahore, Calcutta, Madras, and contributed to the national character of the industry. Those who came from Lahore, then in Punjab, were especially important for the development of the Hindi film industry. Many famous writers like Ismat Chugtai and Saadat Hasan Manto were associated with Hindi cinema. Bombay films have contributed in a big way to produce an image of the city as a blend of dream and reality, of slums and star bungalows. Cities and the challenge of the environment. As you all know, city development everywhere occurred at the expense of ecology and the environment. Natural features were flattened out or transformed in response to the growing demand for space for factories, housing, and other institutions. Large quantities of refuse and waste products polluted air and water, while excessive noise became a feature of urban life. The widespread use of coal in homes and industries in 19th century England raised serious problems. In industrial cities such as Leeds, Bradford, and Manchester, hundreds of factory chimneys spewed black smoke into the skies. When people first joined campaigns for cleaner air, the goal was to control the nuisance through legislation. This was not at all easy, since factory owners and steam engine owners did not want to spend on technologies that would improve their machines. By the 1840s, a few towns such as Derby, Leeds, and Manchester had laws to control smoke in the city. But smoke was not easy to monitor or measure, and owners got away with small adjustments to their machinery that did nothing to stop the smoke. Moreover, the Smoke Abatement Acts of 1847 and 1853, as they were called, did not always work to clear the air. Calcutta, too, had a long history of air pollution. Its inhabitants inhaled grey smoke, particularly in the winter. Since the city was built on marshy land, the resulting fog combined with smoke to generate thick black smog. High levels of pollution were a consequence of the huge population that depended on dung and wood as fuel in their daily life. But the main polluters were the industries and establishments that use steam engines run on coal. The high content of ash in Indian coal was a problem. Many pleas were made to banish the dirty mills from the city, with no effect. However, in 1863, Calcutta became the first Indian city to get smoke nuisance legislation. In 1920, the rice mills of Tollygunge began to burn rice husk instead of coal, leading residents to complain that the air is filled up with black soot, which falls like drizzling rain from morning till night, and it has become impossible to live. The inspectors of the Bengal Smoke Nuisance Commission finally managed to control industrial smoke. Controlling domestic smoke, however, was far more difficult. As London grew, crime flourished. We are told that 20,000 criminals were living in London in the 1870s. We know a great deal about criminal activities in this period, for crime became an object of widespread concern. There were the cheats and tricksters, pickpockets and petty thieves crowding the streets of London. In an attempt to discipline the population, the authorities imposed high penalties for crime and offered work to those who were considered the deserving poor. Factories employed large numbers of women in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. With technological developments, women gradually lost their industrial jobs and were forced to work within households. The 1861 census recorded 250,000 domestic servants, of whom the vast majority were women, many of them recent migrants. A large number of women used their homes to increase family income by taking in lodgers or through such activities as tailoring, washing, or matchbox making. However, there was a change once again in the 20th century. As women got employment in wartime industries and offices, they withdrew from domestic service. Large number of children was pushed into low-paid jobs, often by their parents. Housing. Older cities like London changed dramatically when people began pouring in after the Industrial Revolution. Factory or workshop owners did not house the migrant workers. Instead, individual landowners put up cheap and usually unsafe tenements for the new arrivals. Although poverty was not unknown in the countryside, it was more concentrated and starkly visible in the city. A survey by Chawls, a Liverpool shop owner, found that as many as 1 million Londoners, about 1/5 of the population of London at the time, were very poor and were expected to live only up to an average age of 29, compared to the average life expectancy of 55 among the gentry and the middle class. London, he concluded, needed the rebuilding of at least 400,000 rooms to house its poorest citizens. For a while, the better-off city dwellers continued to demand that slums simply be cleared away. But gradually, a larger and larger number of people began to recognize the need for housing the poor. The reasons for this increasing concern were as follows. First, the vast mass of one-room houses occupied by the poor were seen as a serious threat to public health. They were overcrowded, badly ventilated, and lacked sanitation. Second, there were worries about fire hazards created by poor housing. Third, there was a widespread fear of social disorder, especially after the Russian Revolution in 1917. Workers' mass housing schemes were planned to prevent the London poor from turning rebellious.